Let's talk about the G20. This is Standard Bank of South Africa. Today hosted a high-level forum under the chairmanship of the G20 led by the country to draw attention to women business on the continent. Now, the forum assessed how much more can be done to support women-led businesses and entrepreneurship, especially for South African women and the wider Southern African region. Let's take a listen to that.
Allow me to begin with the words of Gracia Machel. She said, I quote her, "Women's strength, women's industry, women's wisdom are humankind's greatest untapped resource. The challenge of the 21st century is to ensure that this resource is brought into the heart of all human development efforts," unquote. We gather here under the banner of Women to Africa, not only to affirm the truth spoken by Ms. Gracia Machel, but to anchor it in the economy, in finance, in ownership, in value chains, as well as in leadership. Today's gathering, held in partnership with Standard Bank, Time Africa, as well as the Department of Women, Youth and Persons with Disabilities, is guided by the theme, Collaborative Ecosystems for Successful and Resilient Women Businesses. Its intent is clear: to weave together governments, the private sector, development institutions, and women entrepreneurs, not for dialogue alone, but for action capital and accountability. And therefore, it's action, it's capital, and it is accountability. We meet at a moment of extraordinary significance. For the first time in history, the G20 sits on African soil. This is not just South Africa's G20. It is Africa's G20. It is the people's G20. A presidency anchored on the call for solidarity, equality, and sustainability. Values that must translate into real change for women across our continent. However, coming home here, August marks Women's Month on the South African calendar, commemorating the march of more than 20,000 women in 1956 to the Union buildings against the apartheid pass laws. Among them were leaders like Lillian Ngoyi, Helen Joseph, Rahima Musa, and Sophia Williams-de Bruyn. Women who prove that freedom cannot be built on women's silence. And across our continent, we corner giants like Ya Asentewa of Ghana, Funmilayo Ransome Kuti of Nigeria, Wangari Maathai of Kenya, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf of Liberia, women who remind us that Africa's story of liberation and progress cannot be written without women. It is therefore befitting and fitting that we gather in the closing week of Women's Month 2025 under the theme, Building Resilient Economies for All, because no economy can claim resilience if more than half its people, who are women, young and old, remain locked out of markets, of finance, as well as of safety and dignity. So, colleagues, the priorities before us are clear, globally, continentally, and here at home. At a global level, our department has the honor of chairing the Empowerment of Women Working Group under South Africa's G20 presidency. The three priorities of our chairship are the K economy, because the K economy is the invisible infrastructure of growth. Therefore, we must cost care work into the GDPs of our countries, support child care in workplaces, and build national care economy strategies. Financial inclusion is our second priority, because no economy can grow when half its population is excluded. We must expand women's financing windows, create risk-sharing guarantees, and reform procurement systems so that women-owned firms can actually access real markets.
Collaborative ecosystems for successful and resilient women businesses is crucial for the attainment of Agenda 2063, the Africa we want. And the Africa we want is an integrated, prosperous, peaceful Africa, driven by its own citizens, representing a dynamic force in the international arena. But this has to be driven in alignment with Aspiration 6 of Agenda 2063, which says Africa's development relies especially on the potential of women and youth. But before we go into Agenda 2063, the Africa we want, what is the Africa we have? Women, I'll just describe the Africa that the majority of women experience. We all know that poverty in Africa bears the face of an African woman. An African woman struggling to feed her children. An African woman struggling to send her kids to school or to hospital when they are not well. An African woman who sits with her older children who are unemployed, some who are even graduates, who is threatened by gender-based violence. Even women entrepreneurs do not have